Hello all, welcome back to my channel TechSense. In today's video, we will understand about Azure function bindings. In my last video, we discussed about function triggers. What are function triggers? How many types of triggers do we have? So in this session, we will understand about bindings. So what is binding? It's a way to connect to data from within your code. You can connect your data sources without having to code specific connection logic like database connection or web API interfaces. Let's say for an example, there is a requirement that you need to read data from one SQL server and you want to implement some logic and tweak the data in a way, and then after the execution of your logic you want to write to data to somewhere. In that case, you have to connect to the database to read the data, you have to connect to another system to write the data over there. So this binding provides us the facility so that we need not to write any code. There are already bindings provided. So just click there and select what kind of binding you want to select, and based on that you can implement your logic. So you need not to write your code for connectivity thing. So this is binding. How many types of bindings do we have? We have two types of bindings: input binding, output binding. Input binding is a connection to the data source. From these sources, the function can read the data. It will come in the parameter and then you can read the data from there, from that input binding, and do your logic, whatever you want to implement. What is output binding? It's a connection to the data destination. Input is the source, do your logic in the function, and output is the destination. So input is the source, output is the destination. And on those destinations, you can write your data. Some common bindings are blob storage, maybe input or output, Azure Service Bus Queues, Azure Cosmos DB, Azure Event Hubs, external files, external tables, HTTP endpoints. Now let's see in the portal how we can read the data from the database and how we can write the data. Now let's see in the portal how we can read the data from the data source and how we can do a logic, how we can implement a logic and write the data to the output binding. As I already explained, to create the function we need to have function app first of all. So I explained how we created the function app and how we can create the function inside it. So this is my function app, and if I go in function app I can see all of the functions. There are two functions as of now. Let's open any of one of them. So bindings are in the format of JSON only. If I click here, code and test, this is my function. If I click here, in index.js, I already explained, in that particular area, my logic will be there. But if I go there, function.json, in this area, I can see the binding. So these are my bindings. See, my binding is Cosmos DB, output binding is Cosmos DB, input binding is also Cosmos DB. So this is where we can see the binding. And if I want to add any binding to my function, you have to click here, integration part in the left pane. And here you can see these are my input bindings. As of now, I have one input binding and three output binding. You can create multiple bindings also. Add input. Just click there, add input. Click here, add output. So this is my function. This is just reading the data from this input and doing its own logic, implementing its own logic and writing the data to these particular output bindings. So this is binding basically. As of now, we understood what are bindings, how many types of bindings do we have, what are the uses of the bindings. Now let's see how we can read the data from data source using input binding and how we can write it to the output binding. Let's start. So my requirement is to read the data from Cosmos DB and read in my function. You'll also get to know how we can create the Cosmos DB. It's the database where we can store the data. So Azure Cosmos DB, click on create, click on add, mention all of the basic details. Here I mention all of the details. Name, it should be unique globally. Resource group, location, and the API. Cosmos DB have multiple APIs. I already explained in my fundamental tutorial. So I will select Core SQL. Click Review and Create. Validation success. Click on Create. Now let's wait for some time. Deployment is in progress. So the Cosmos DB is already created. Let's click on Go to Resource. After creating Cosmos DB, we need to create a container. Cosmos DB is like a cluster of databases, and once we create the containers, it's just like we are creating the database inside it, and inside database we have tables. So to create the container, click on Data Explorer, click on New Container, and mention all of the details here. I mentioned the database name TextSense throughput is 1000, container ID. So inside my database, I'm just creating, you can say, table called bookmarks and /id. That is my partition key, which will distribute my data with this term. So after mentioning all of the details, I'll click on OK. Take some time to create the container. What we have done so far, the intention is to read the data from Cosmos DB to my function. For that purpose, I created the Cosmos DB. I created the container as well, because first of all, I should have the database. Only after that, I can read the data also. So I created the Cosmos DB, created the container. Let's add some items as well in container. Add items in container. Let's see how we can do that. So this is my TextSense DB. Click here, bookmark, and then to add the item, you can just select this. To add the record in here, just click on TextSense DB. This is bookmarks. This is my container. In container, I have items. We can write the store procedure also, UDS as well. So click on items, and to create the item, click here, new item. I can add item in the JSON format. Let's say the ID is docs, and the URL is against that ID. The URL is https docs.microsoft.com. Yeah, so this is my first item. Now click on save. Once you click on save, it will add this record and return some values. So after that, you only added one record. Let's create some more records here. Let's say for portal, save. This is my second record. One more for learn. Save. So you can see in the items, now you can see multiple items: docs, portal, learn. So this is how we can create the Cosmos DB. Inside Cosmos DB, we can create the containers, and inside containers, we can add multiple items. Now we have the database ready. We have the data ready with us. So the next step is to create the functions and read the data from this Cosmos DB to my function. So now let's create the function inside function app. This is my function app. This is my function. Let's add the function. I created the HTTP trigger function. I already explained how to create HTTP trigger function in my previous video, so I straightforward just created it. Since we have to read the data from that Cosmos DB, we need to add the input binding. So to add the input binding, just click on integration, and in inputs, click on add input. In the list, just select Cosmos DB. See, as I already told you, we have predefined bindings here. So we have to read the data from Cosmos DB. So select Cosmos DB. Now we have to mention all of the details here. We have to provide the connection. So our connection name is, but our Cosmos DB account name is different. So click on new, and this is the Cosmos DB account that we created, TechSense DB 2020. Select this, click on OK. In document ID, mention this ID. Document parameter name, let's say bookmark. This is the parameter name. With this name only we will read all of the context in my function. So you can put the name anything here, but only this keyword we will be using in a function to read the details from the Cosmos DB. What is the database name? That also we need to mention. Our database name was TechSense DB. My collection name was bookmarks. Let me double confirm. It was bookmarks, yeah, bookmarks. Document ID is this. Partition key also we selected. We mentioned while creating the container. Then click on OK. So the binding has been created now. Created the function and added the input binding, that was Cosmos DB. Now let's write the logic to read the data from Cosmos DB to my function. Click on code and test, index.js, copy this. Bookmark was my parameter that I mentioned while creating the binding, so that's okay. Yeah, okay, so click on save. Now let's test this function. Click on test and run. Input, my request is not name Azure, it should be ID docs. If you remember, we created some records in Cosmos DB. Yeah, for ID docs, for ID learn, and against every ID there is a URL. So what we're doing here, we are passing the ID and in return we expect a URL. So the ID is docs, click on run, let's say what it gives in the output. So in return it's giving this URL. So it's working. That is how we can read the data from Cosmos DB in my function. And if you want to write this data somewhere else, then you can do this through output binding. That we will discuss in my next video. So that's it for today's video. In my next video, I will also explain how we can write the data using output binding. So for any query, please write down in comment section. You can also email us at mytechsense@gmail.com or visit our website techsenseconsulting.com. Thank you. Thank you for your time. If you like the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thanks.